well, conservatives are facing the chilling effects at the hands of big tech oligarchs. In the past day, Twitter banned President Trump from its platform. The indefinite suspension of Trump on Facebook and Instagram continues. And now Google and Apple are threatening to freeze out conservative social media outlet Parler. Steve Bannon's War Room channel on YouTube was also pulled. It is an all-out offensive on the conservative movement by big tech. Let's bring in our panel to discuss. Will Chamberlain is the senior counsel for the Internet Accountability Project, and Dan Gaynor is vice president of the Media Research Center's Tech Watch Business and Culture. Welcome. Dan, I want to start by talking to you. Twitter has kicked off President Trump. What does that mean now that he's been kicked off permanently, and are there any long-term implications specifically that you're concerned about?
Well, I mean, the long-term implications are that big tech is at war. You were mentioning the firefighter metaphor, and I come from a family of firefighters. And this is like firefighters during the Blitz in World War II, where you're being bombed from above, where you're trying to put out flames and trying to calm things down. Big tech doesn't want to calm things down. They want to escalate the war against conservatives. You didn't mention Amazon employees are calling for Parler the servers to be shut down, which apparently they house them at Amazon. That would effectively shut down Parler. They don't want conservatives to have an online voice. And what this means is that Twitter allows some of the most heinous nations on earth to promote propaganda, to claim that the U.S. military created the COVID-19 virus, to promote anti-Semitism, to promote genocide, and allows that on its platform. Only after massive abuse did Twitter even put a warning note on a rationalization of Uyghur Muslim genocide. They have decided the president of the United States can be silenced, but the worst dictators on earth today are perfectly fine with Jack Dorsey.
Now, Will, I'll come to you because, part of this also, speaking specifically about Parler, Apple has basically put them on 24-hour notice. They're going to remove them from the App Store. You've got Google, who has already removed them from the store. You made a tweet yesterday basically saying that, at the same time that Apple and Google enjoying these 230 protections, they have simultaneously demanded that Parler basically violate 230 in its essence in order to stay on the platform. Talk to us a little bit about that, and where do we go from here? Because it almost feels as if big tech is daring us to strike down 230 as a ploy to prevent any competition from emerging in the future.
Sure. So first, people don't really think about how Apple and Google combined have 99.9% of the mobile operating system market. So if Apple and Google both decide that your app is no longer kosher, then you're gone. There's no way to run a meaningful social media business, a serious one, without access to mobile phones, because that's where 80 to 90% of social media consumption is done. So people talk about how a free market is going to solve, how we can have the solution to Facebook and Twitter censorship is competition, but clearly, as long as Apple and Google have the final say and act collectively, they have just complete control with their oligopoly. But the second really interesting issue is that Apple's ultimatum to Parler said that you need to take responsibility for what's posted on your site by third parties, and if you don't, we're going to ban you. And it's ironic because Apple and Google and the rest of the tech companies, the big ones, are all lobbying to maintain their Section 230 protections, which precisely protect them from liability for the postings of third-party users. This is just a unique imposition they've decided to put on Parler. They don't really put it on Twitter. They don't put it on Facebook. They don't put it on YouTube because, of course, there's a bunch of cruddy content there. But they're deciding to put this imposition on Parler, and it's not an imposition they're willing to live with themselves when it comes to government liability. All of a sudden, they're talking about the importance of freedom and the importance of not, imposing tort liability on them. I think that underlying hypocrisy reveals something very, very sinister here, that there's just this collective discrimination going on against conservative companies. And the remedy to collective discrimination is ultimately essentially creating new kind of civil rights type legislation where you say you're not allowed to discriminate on these bases. If you do so, people who are discriminated against can go into court and get an injunction to force you to stop.
Now, Dan, to that point, let's talk about some of these unintended consequences before we come back to Will about the legal consequences. When you start talking about getting rid of 230, I mentioned before that all of these tech giants, Twitter, Facebook, they would have been killed in the crib without the protections afforded to them by 230. What are the unintended consequences here by getting rid of it? And then extension, when you start saying that they can get rid of President Trump from the platform and basically say they own the account, what are the implications for the artist long term who has built up a following on Twitter? Can they come back and say that they not only own the account, but also the intellectual property that goes along with it?
Well, I mean, basically what 230 does, it lets them do pretty much whatever they want. And, so if you get rid of it, a couple of these companies, Facebook particularly, is so big that it can afford to use artificial intelligence and huge numbers of employees to remove content they would consider controversial. They would love that. Facebook's been begging for global rules about content so they don't have to mess with this anymore. But then no company, Parler is a great example, but CloudHub, no brand new company could ever compete on those standards. It wouldn't have the money, wouldn't have the funding. Among them, Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon, these are the most powerful companies in human history, more powerful than the British East India Company, and they conquered India. So right. When you look at this, that's the danger. And what's even more disturbing is the mad rush of the press to suppress free speech, not just online, but we saw it just the other day with CNN, one of CNN's media reporters trying to get Fox, Newsmax, and OAN all removed from cable channels, basically using this mad rush of wokeism to try to get rid of their competitors.
Now, Will, to your point, quickly got about 30 seconds here. You talk specifically about the fact that Google, Apple monopolizing the mobile market, no competition possible without access to those platforms. Even if Trump wanted to create some type of rival, what is the pathway, and are there any legal remedies in a world where without access to those main competitors, you're effectively locked out of the ecosystem?
I mean, the only remedy we would have now is antitrust. They would be collectively acting to shut out competition. So that's probably anti-competitive behavior. So there's a viable cause of action. But other than that, you'd probably need to change federal law. And it's going to be a while before we can do that.
All right. Will Chamberlain, Dan Gaynor, thank you so much for joining us.